Our next guest is Paul Miller, also known as DJ Spooky. He is a National Geographic explorer and one of MIT Publications' top-selling authors. He's here to talk about climate change and the global brain. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Miller.
Hey, my name is Paul Miller, aka DJ Spooky, and I'm a writer, artist, and musician based between New York and Boulder. And one of the things that intrigues me about conferences like this is that we have to think about the role of the arts and creativity, because I think it's a tool that the left and more progressive institutions and people like many of you in this room often have not necessarily engaged. And one could argue that the fallacy of more of the creative processes that go into how we think about data, and many of the panels that you've seen earlier today, they're all showing you slides, they're all showing you all sorts of data that should be compelling, but data is not necessarily a neutral and/or cold tool. It's got ideology built in, and if you're a mathematician, there's always what you call implicit bias in how we think and view any kind of data. So, as an artist, I use this kind of material as my new palette. And I'm here to represent a new project I'm working on with two founders, Michael Tracy from Presidium Principal and Natalia Vergis, who's also an artist and creative and heavily involved with media and advertising. So what I want to kind of present to you all in a moment is a video from Natalia Vega-Berry and Michael Tracy from a project that I've recently joined called The Global Brain. Now, the reason I'm beginning my discussion with an image of me at the Antarctic Circle, I went to Antarctica for 6 weeks and went to all of the major ice fields. And the idea was to create acoustic portraits of ice. Now, recently, there was a gentleman that was sponsored by Greenpeace who went to the glaciers near the Arctic Circle and played a piano as a glacier collapsed. And that was one of the most powerful images I've seen of 2016. But for my own work, when I was doing photography, when I was documenting all the different material, of seeing this sort of devastation, you're put in perspective of what ancient philosophers or all sorts of people from different centuries would have called the new sublime. I was talking to my friend Michael Brune, who's the director of Sierra Club, a little bit earlier. Me and him went to the Arctic Circle recently, a little while ago, and I'm going to tie that into this as well. So when I was working on the ice projects, this is what the data looked like. It was a collection of temperature differentials, and above all, it was facing this notion of how do you turn data into sound. So I did what you call algorithmic musical transcription and placed that in an algorithmic compositional batch of tools that allowed me to work with scientists, people like Gavin Schmidt, who's NASA's director of global climate modeling, and also some of the folks from the Columbia University Earth Institute. So what I want to do today is not show you charts, but I want to pull you away from charts to start thinking about the creative economy, and that's probably what Global Brain is most focused on. So I'm going to begin with a quote from Adam Smith. And many of you are probably involved with the investment economy. Adam Smith had a really famous phrase. If anyone's ever read classical economic theory, the wealth of nations, we're still dealing with the tragedy of that. And one could argue that our minds are the scene of the crime at this point, because how we think about artificial scarcity, how we think about market economies, it still goes back to the legacy that Adam Smith gave to the Industrial Revolution. So one of the phrases that people tend to forget from Adam Smith is he simply says, all money is a matter of belief. So if you're thinking about belief and you're looking at the heart of classical economics, what makes money have value? To me, as you go back to art and you go back to science, you can easily see that belief is the basic common denominator. So when you think about belief, I want to show you this gentleman, which maybe many of you might not know. His name is Semmelweis. And in science, there's a very famous phrase where they say it's called the Semmelweis effect. And it's basically when you dismiss out of hand in a professional context innovation. And innovation in our time is one of the most valuable currencies of all time. Let's call this Uber of the mind. So one day he said, look, why don't we wash our hands so that basically babies who are being born are not being exposed to what was not known at that time as germs. And other doctors said, hey, why do we need to have people washing their hands? And he was laughed out of his profession and ended up kind of in a mental institution and died a very bitter and depressed person. It wasn't until a little bit later that Louis Pasteur came up with what you call pasteurization, and they realized that people are exposed to germs at very early ages, but children, and one could argue that the Semmelweis reflex is a simple kind of underlying premise of our global economy. We dismiss out of hand many of the solutions that are facing us right in the eye. I just love this idea of the Semmelweis reflex is a professional reflex to reject new evidence that in some way threatens established norms or firmly held beliefs. So this is a great proverb I loved. It's a Cree Indian proverb where they simply say, only after the last tree has been cut down, only after the last river has been poisoned, only after the last fish has been caught, only then will you find that money cannot be eaten. And as we are here gathered at AREDAY, we have to think about a different kind of economy, the creative economy. And that's something that Global Brain will be focusing on like a laser over the next couple of years. So I'm going to go from that to this. If we're talking about belief, we're in an election cycle. This is Donald Trump. He likes to tweet stuff like this. The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make US manufacturing non-competitive. Right? Okay. I mean, I couldn't make this stuff up. So if you want to talk about belief, this is where the left and many people who are probably in this audience have common ground with trying to find better solutions than just pounding the right wing with data. My motto these days is it's hard to argue with a storm that just smashed your house. But Donald Trump would probably argue with the storm, come to think of it. So when you're thinking about this is a fact-free election, we're in 2016 at the peak of human civilization, and someone like this is running around, with no facts, no information, no data, you realize that the fallacy of the left and more progressive people is that we've over-relied on data, whereas many of the people who would probably be in opposition have focused on the emotional narrative. They focused on far more of how the narrative gives them a sense of being in collaboration with something that enables their own belief systems. Those ideologies then inform economics, economics then informs beliefs, and you have a vicious cycle. In economics, there's another term what you call virtuous cycle, which I'm sure many of you are in terms of economics. It's when you have what benefits grow out of something instead of how much is extracted from. So a virtuous cycle. So if you said Donald Trump in front of anyone in this room, I'm sure he would probably burst into flames. But for us, when you start thinking about the basic idea here, we have to start thinking about other issues like social justice and also thinking about the way the environment is not just a physical space, but a cultural space. And when we start thinking about the Anthropocene era, which many people who are involved with the sciences now refer to our era, we have to start thinking about the arts have a very powerful role to play with not just visualization, but the way the mind actually works in a data-driven society. So that's Global Brain. I want to play you a video clip that we have, and it was directed with Natalia, who's one of the critical folks involved with this. And what you're going to see is a couple things. First and foremost, I want to just show you guys a quick data point. This is a recent study of Bank of America, who's trying to figure out how to extract more value out of your savings. And they say millennials engage with their smartphones more than people. So most young people these days, I'm sure we all have friends who just are staring at a screen someplace. Like me, I'm staring at 3 at the moment. And we have to start thinking about where is the space of new narrative, right? This is something that everyone in this room probably can relate to. So if Bank of America is on it, we should be on it. And for the Global Brain Project, some of the best ways that we start to think about the arts as enabling new narratives, new forms of perspective, it's about the mind. So when I showed you the Semmelweis reflex, it's a scientific thing, and you can look it up. Everything I'm talking about is not Donald Trump's tweeting here. It's actual real stuff. Adam Smith versus Trump, we can all argue that one. But let's think about it as a viewpoint of what myths of the 21st century will enable better and new perspectives. And that's where art is the most powerful tool. My motto these days is that the imagination is the ultimate renewable resource. So if we're starting to think about reimagining the near future, the economics plays as much a component as belief. And that's where I was showing you Adam Smith and Semmelweis. But I wanted to show you this video just because I think it's a really beautiful way to think about the way the arts can enable not just social change, but reimagining how we look at the world around us. So 1 second here, I'm just to call up the file. All right, there's a lot of files flying around here. So it was a pleasure to bump into Michael Brune, because me and him went to the Arctic Circle together a little while ago. And me and him had a series of debates and discussions while we were hiking. And he then went with Darren Aronofsky. While I'm calling up this file, I'll just show you a quick image that I think will be helpful to think about this. When you think of the mashup and remix, this is, for example, this is Bush and Obama's face photoshopped. All you have to do is just line up the cheekbones, and it's a remix. That's what he says, we say in DJ culture. But the fun part about not just looking at how data and imagery and sound can be recombined to give you radically unimagined perspectives. I mean, I'm sure Bush and Obama would not like to be in the same face. We have to start thinking about that as a cultural tool, a norm that actually gives people a better sensibility, but also enables new perspective. So let's just give you the video. 1 second here. I think you'll find it really beautiful. It was well edited, well produced. 1 second. I think that's so many files. When you think about the Global Brain Project, it's looking at creative minds, brands, and causes. But the basic sensibility for us, for me at least, is how to enable many people like you all in the room to start thinking about that from the viewpoint of the creative arts. And for me, when you look at electronic music and DJ culture, I wanted to show you from that expedition that went to Antarctica. I ended up, we did a series of initiatives. Say, for example, this is Earth Day just a couple years ago, and we had about 250,000 people gather at the same place that Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And by the way, this is on purpose. You're getting a little tour of my hard drive here. And that's perfectly fine. The NSA's already beat you to it, so I'm sure. Let's see, hold on. Yeah, so it was me, the band The Flaming Lips, groups like The Roots. Probably, I doubt there's many hip hop people here, but just a guess. And hold on, yeah, this is, okay. So this is about 250,000 people who like electronic music. And when you start thinking about that as a kind of new demographic, and that's the same place where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, I took the sounds that I had gathered from Antarctica, turned them into electronic music, hip hop, dubstep, techno, you know, probably music that you might not have on your phones, but just saying. And that's the sound of global culture at the moment. So when you start to think about that as a new point of thinking about algorithms and the collision between code and culture, how can we synthesize data to make new kinds of culture? And that's where I think the issue, for me at least, comes into play. So, for example, 2016, this is what happens in 1 internet minute. And if you think about it, there's about 60,000 video hours of Netflix watched, 150 million emails sent, 1,500 Uber rides given, 51,000 app downloads from the App Store. Amazon makes over $200,000 every couple seconds. LinkedIn usually has at least 120 to maybe 1,000 new accounts. There's usually between 300,000 to 500,000 tweets every 60 seconds. So in the time I just recounted that, that's where we're at. And if you start thinking about what that does to someone's sense of how to engage the world, let's go back to one last quote, because I think it's a really beautiful one to think about this. And I do want you guys to remember that there is a long history of left-wing progressive causes involved with the arts. This is Ralph Waldo Emerson from his main treatise, Nature. He says, "To speak truly, few adult persons can see nature. Most persons do not even see the sun. At least they have a very superficial seeing. The sun illuminates only the eye of man, but shines into the eye of the heart of the child. The lover of nature is he whose inward and outward senses are still truly adjusted to each other, who has retained the spirit of infancy even into the era of manhood." So Ralph Waldo Emerson's a big inspiration for me for today, but above all, we've had over 2 centuries of these kinds of inspiration. And I think that you're going to really enjoy this video. Hold on 1 second while I load it up here. All right, so this is the Global Brain sort of first manifesto. And I think basically it's stunningly beautiful and well done kind of sensibility. 1 second here.
When you are named a faith keeper of the Onondaga Council of Chiefs, and for me, it was 51 years ago, you are told that we are now placing in your hands all life, and it is your responsibility to look after all life. Every person, every tree, every animal, every stream, and the earth itself, unto the 7th generation. In 1972, the world started a process that is mapping our future. The United Nations Conference on the Human Environment held in Stockholm brought the industrialized and developing nations together to delineate the rights of people to a healthy and productive environment.
The environmental crisis will profoundly alter
Our burning of fossil fuels is slowly warming the globe.
Our report is founded upon the concept of sustainable development.
We all have two hands and the sentiment of the world.
Now I wonder if they will even exist.
We are plundering our children's heritage for our present unsustainable practices.
Notre maison brûle.
The key is to come out from Johannesburg with a credible commitment to action.
Now is your moment
to save ourselves and the planet for our children.
We can fix this. We can stop this madness.
Accelerated climate change is here right now.
I will link arms with those marching for climate action.
We, baby, are going to fight. Mommy, Daddy, your president too. We will all fight.
We are experiencing a process that is linking our nations and communities much more closely together than they have ever been before. Our lives are intertwined via the food we eat, the music we listen to, the information we get, and the ideas we hold. Last year, the world's leaders unanimously committed to eliminate extreme poverty,
Catastrophic wars,
address climate change, and build more resilient societies. In the Agenda 2030, we have a blueprint for sustainable development. Now the real work and the real opportunities begin.
We have a very
The potential offered by these new Sustainable Development Goals and the binding treaty on climate change is immense.
It is a new chapter of hope for the world.
It is we, the peoples, who are embarking today on a journey towards a more sustainable and equitable future. Our journey will involve governments, the United Nations system and other international institutions, local authorities, indigenous peoples, civil society, business and the private sector, the scientific and the academic community, and all people.
Because we deserve to do more than just survive. We deserve to thrive.
This interconnectedness among humans on the planet is creating a global village where the barriers of national and international boundaries become less relevant and the world a smaller place. The road ahead may be fraught with difficulties, challenges, and struggles, but we must dare each other to be visionary, to be ambitious, to be leaders. Given the opportunity, we can raise ourselves. We must join hands with the rest of creation and speak of common sense, responsibility, solidarity, and peace. We have all the tools. We are standing in front of an opportunity to change the course of life on the planet. Let's work together to make this world better, where everybody can live with dignity and abundance. Our future starts now. To leave no one behind, we must all lead.
So that video is the sort of the lead trailer for Global Brain. And basically, I'd like to ask you all to join us at COP22 in Morocco. Michael Tracy and Natalia Verga Barres are going to be co-hosting, and I'll be also curating. And basically, these are some of the issues that I think are really critical to our time. It's not just data. So I do want to always leave you all with a sense that we can think about renewal, we can think about all sorts of different versions of all the technologies many of you all have been talking about, but unless it actually speaks to the passions and the emotions, we might as well be speaking to the wind. So I'd like to just wrap up with this last little quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson and then transition to Donald Trump again, and just leave you with that to think about for 2016's election. So thank you.